I think one of the first things I want to talk to you about is that I'm not sure. I'm sure you are a little bit aware, but as far as having a leadership role and being a mentor that you are, I just wanted to let you know that you are for many women in leadership roles, and it's something that we are trying to encourage more of as well. And your early influences. I know that you grew up in a police family, and your father was a policeman. But did you always want to be a policewoman?
No, not at all. The first bit about the early influences, very much my mother was and still is a very strong influence, and the way she lived a life and the way she required us to live ours, I think was part of it. And eventually, I mean, becoming a police officer just kind of, there weren't a lot of choices in the 70s for women, and typing and nursing and teaching didn't quite strike me. So policing became something that I thought about, and it really evolved over time, the idea that I might join. And then when my father said I shouldn't, then that was it.
And there weren't many female policewomen when you joined, were there? What was the ratio?
Well, there was 130 of us in New South Wales and 8,000 men. Right. So don't know what the ratio is, but it's low percentage.
So well, there's an interesting spatial scenario in itself, and working as a woman amongst a lot of men. How do you, deal with that?
Well, I remember the first time I walked into the police academy, and there would have been about 600 men in the academy at sort of 8 o'clock in the morning, and I knew that somewhere else there was one other woman there, and that's all there were.
And at the time, did they plan for, as far as bathrooms and facilities for women? Was that thought about at the time?
I think we used to share the bathroom with the cleaners, and which is fine. That was not a problem, but it was kind of used as a way, talk about intimate space, that said, well, you can't have police women at these locations because we don't have toilets. And I went, I'll get over it, we'll share, sort of.
Yeah. So Christine, you're since leaving the Commissioner's role, you've worked extensively with disadvantaged groups, and I know you've maintained a long interest in domestic violence victims and like. So my question is, a lot of our conversation about these intimate publics is really about people like us, who have, maybe they're but they have sort of different sexual preferences or different physical issues. Now, what about the groups that you deal with? I mean, like the homeless, the prostitutes, and the women who are victims of violence. I mean, what does an intimate public mean for those people?
I guess it's in some cases it means, and for me, just to go back a minute, I met many of those people when I was very young, when I was in the police. Right. So I worked in King's Cross and Darlinghurst, and so we would meet and work with a lot of prostitutes and a lot of homeless people. 200 a night would be locked up in our cells, and gay, the whole kind of clash with the police and the gay and lesbian group was kind of 1978 was the big deal, and I was there. Yeah. Not quite at the station when it occurred, but around that time. So I suppose I got to kind of understand and disability, mental illness, and a range of those things when I was young. And I suppose what I think about many of those groups is they feel incredibly isolated, they feel like they're in their own space, and I think they're perfectly correct to believe that those of us who kind of maybe aren't in any of those groups don't really understand. And so I think that was the piece that I have tried then, which now turns out to be about, 35, 40 years of thinking about how you can integrate and how you can allow those people, simply put, and probably for all of us in some ways, to be the best and to be able to achieve.
Right. Okay. So then let's talk about the police, right? Because the police are the front line. I mean, they interact with these minority groups, and so what's their role in helping us to absorb these groups into society?
It's been a changing role, I think. I'm not sure who wrote it, but it was kind of at one stage said that the police were the kind of the grinding edge on the mainstream communities and everybody else. And I think that was the case back in the 60s and then into the 70s. But I think policing is trying to go through, and has been for a long time, go through changing that behaviour. And you do see those people. So if you took family violence, the issue for me in family violence has got a long history. I'm having seen it personally firsthand as a police officer, not in my own family, but as a police officer back in the 70s. And it was kind of ignored. You weren't supposed to do much about it. And so I think what policing started to do is take on and recognise that we do have to do things about it.
Right.
And whether it's mental illness, whether it's people, gay and lesbian communities, transsexual, it's about recognising that people have a right and we are their police. And I think that was the change that I felt, was that we are the police. The police were important for all of those people, and we had to support and we had to assist and we had to do better than we were doing.
Yeah. Christine, it sounds like police have to be psychologists as well. Yeah. And I guess with the times that the training of the police has changed so much, and that because there's so much to deal with as well, that's what you've observed.
Oh, sure. I think the initial training, I did 6 weeks when I walked into that door, and that was it. People went, that's okay, what do you need to learn more about? Yep. And in fact, I think it was resisted. And maybe that was New South Wales. I think perhaps Victoria was a bit more training than that, and same with South Australia. But I think over time, that continuous training and learning meant that you had to be exposed and you had to learn how to do things differently. But I guess one of the things that struck me about this conversation, and you touched on it before, was also the way that the intimate space of family violence has dramatically changed. And that the idea that was all about, that's behind those doors, and it's not a role for the community, it's not a role for for the police, and it's sort of over there and away. And I suppose I liken it to kind of the opening up. This wonderful space is about opening up of family violence, and said it is not about you having that relationship and you can do what you like in it, because the consequences for the rest of us are enormous. I was listening to people talk about people in prison, and there was an argument sort of during the week, and the side that says lock your butt out forever, and then the other side. But my sense is, if you went to a prison, you find mental illness, you find illiteracy, you find at least half the victims of family violence or sexual abuse. So I'm really pleased, and it's taken an awful long time to open up that intimate space.
Right.
And the same really, I think, with sexual assault, but I'm still not sure we've got there. Again, you're in an incredibly intimate space of what happens to someone when they're sexually abused. And so we're kind of digging that out with institutional child abuse, the kind of Royal Commission. We're trying to dig it out a bit more, but we've got a long way to go, where, it's still... kind of that space has to be opened up and has to be
it's enormously sensitive.
It is, but that's because we were brought up to believe it was our fault, and you weren't allowed to talk about it, and the law gave you an incredibly difficult time if you did raise it. And of course perpetrators always know that it's just you and them. And and they're going to be tougher than you are, and they're going to get away with it in many cases. And I suppose that intimate part, when I kind of thought about this conversation, if we could open up the edges of that, like this building, then we would be a mile in front as well.
Yeah.
Christine, one question, personal question. This one. You belong to an intimate public as a senior female leader in a very male-dominated world, and in fact, in the broader corporate world, you're relatively unique still. So what are your observations on that intimate public? The senior female leader, how's it changing? What's been achieved? What's to be done?
Look, I wish, that I could be my young, naive 20-year-old self and, all the grand ambitions of what we thought would happen in the future. And look, in some cases in policing, there are a lot more women in senior positions, and that's been important. But I teach, women in leadership stuff, and I've been doing some work just over the last January about the lack of progress of women into senior management. Boards are a side issue really, but just simply into senior management, and the progress is still not there. And I guess that's so being someone in it, and I guess a bit like my friend Naomi and others who are here, and Jane, it's up to all of us to keep talking about it and to openly, publicly question, why we're still not where we should be, and what is it about about women. I mean, we have half the brains in this, country, and yet we're not allowed to exercise those brains and to do. And the other piece is we've got to be able to do it as ourselves.
Right.
I mean, I think the other thing I've learned is sometimes you, are told just kind of play the game and shut up and get on with it and you'll be okay, and that's damaging.
Right.
Damaging to women. And I think we need to be able to be ourselves, be able to be women as leaders, and we would just be so much better off. I mean, Melbourne gave a lot of women chances. I mean, Joan Kerners has started that.
Yep.
Julia, in the sense, obviously coming from Melbourne, Sharon Burrows, Naomi, I mean, just lots of women who've been able to, and me, I mean, remember when I got the job.
Exactly.
It was just
and
a
I think also relationships between women and fostering and mentorship is also a very important thing, and I think that's something that I love to see, or I try and pride myself on doing it in my line of work, but I try and get the word out to say, look, for leadership for other young women, just give some time and establish that relationship with someone.
Yeah, and to allow them. I mean, we can... I listen, and I love Quentin Bryce, and she's a wonderful Governor-General, but she said, we can't have it all. Well, stuff her. We can't. I mean, I just, it's not true. It's about how you change the environment. It's about how you change work. I mean, I read, some things the other day about work environments. It just meant men could be fathers, and the value that would have, and that they could take time, and that, we could go backwards and forwards about raising kids, and that organisations. I mean, I remember with the police, they said to me, you can't work part-time. And I went, what? This is a flexible shift structure. Why not? And I think it's, so we do have to support, we do have to encourage.
But it can be as simple as speaking up and saying,
Sure.
but why?
Yeah.
And if nobody's ever questioned it before, maybe that's why, where the problem is. You just have to keep questioning things and try and change it.
Yeah, and when they knock you over, get yourself up and keep going,
Okay.
Exactly. You were so close with the community. We were talking about spaces. How did you react with the people who had lost in the bushfires with their homes? There's another that's beyond intimate space, vanished in a flash. How did you find the healing for those people and how that went?
It was an amazing thing to see and to be part of, and to meet people at the most distressed. And when they'd lost children and families and friends and then their homes and then their communities and their lives. And I think what people were looking for was a sense of support from the community, which I think they got. From someone like me, they were looking for a sense of hope.
Yep.
It didn't take me too long to recognise that, to say, here's the facts, and we're going to work with you, and we'll talk with you about what you want and how to create your communities. And I always say to people, when people are critical of community consultation, the really interesting thing I watched was we had 106 communities affected by the fires, but we got together 33 community recovery committees. And these people were just, incredibly harmed in many ways, but they stood up and said, we want you to help us do these things to improve our community. And so I think giving people the strength, giving them support, listening to them, turned out. And there were arguments and there was all this stuff. And that people who are affected psychologically, go through stages, and sometimes they'll yell at you and sometimes they want to hug you. Okay.
Yeah. And it's a very long process as well. It's not just, oh God, now we've built the house and everything's fine.
I mean, 6 years later, this February will be the 6th anniversary, and there are still many people who are still, struggling, and many who didn't come out and talk about it. Men, particularly, don't want to talk about the idea that they were affected by it, and it's taking a long time for that to happen. But I think we've also learned it takes a long time, and the recovery process and renewal, takes a long time. And I think the government, particularly both governments, need to be congratulated, because they're still in there and they're still supporting, which I think is really important.
Yeah. You're involved in something I find a really remarkable initiative, the Good Shepherd Microfinance. Can you explain what that's about?
Look, this is easily the best thing. The sisters, the Sisters of the Good Shepherd 30 years ago lent their own money to people who were poor for no interest. And all their advisors said, silly women, you'll never get it back. Well, strangely enough, they did. In fact, 99% of the people they lent their money to paid the money back. And so they started a program which is no interest loans. And And that's gone on, in fact, for 30 years.
Wow.
And the money was given out through not-for-profits. All of the major not-for-profits you can think of, they're all involved. And then about 2.5 years ago, the Nun said, this isn't fast enough and people don't know enough about it. So they asked me would I chair Good Shepherd Microfinance, which they broke out of one of their organisations. NAB provides the money, $110 million NAB loans for free, for no interest, or very low interest if it's a larger sum. And so what we've been doing, and what I did was got a board and a CEO and have really started to try and drive so that people who are poor can know about it. And recently we did advertising, which was stop small problems getting big, because what we know is that the fridge breaks down, the washing machine breaks down, which many of us might not think much about, but if it happens to you, it's a serious matter because you can't afford one. And so you can pay off a fridge, you can pay off a washing machine, buy a small car, you can buy your kids a computer to go back to school with. You can pay it off in reasonable amounts over time, no exploitation, no 46% interest rate, which is what payday lenders are. Yeah. And we just need more people to know. So here's another 100 or 2.
It's empowering, isn't it? No, it's wonderful.
And people are incredibly strong after.
That's gone so quickly. Yeah. We're about to pass the baton, and would you please thank Bob? And Christine, would you please stay?